Oh, great.
Yeah, not necessarily side by side, but the same book in parallel and then discussing it. It's a wonderful practice, or listening to the same audiobook.
Yep. It works well. You can drop everything and play.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to go do something fun. You're going to play video games. You're going to go play with your kid. You're going to do whatever, play with your dog. Like it doesn't even have to actually be play, but play it to you could signify personal time, right? It doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I
really like this drop everything and blank category. That you probably shouldn't have more than 2 or 3 of those overall.
Pretty much like 1 to 2 maybe.
Great.
Is where you want to go after that.
So the idea is then to redistribute the numbers on this list, but through a very concrete action. And I like this drop everything and blank because it speaks to the non-negotiable aspect of it.
Has to be. Life will get pushed.
Right. It's not a fine time to, right.
Correct.
It's not in next year I'm going to.
Correct.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you put those things you might as well just don't even put it on your list, right? Because it's not going to happen.
Yeah. You're talking to somebody who loves rules. Because when they are non-negotiable rules, they provide this incredible organizing force for the brain.
Yeah.
It's really a neuroscience thing in my mind.
Totally.
And actually, we did an episode on happiness where you find that once people make a decision, if they eliminate the possibility of other decisions, like literally the hatch is closed, that is it.
Burn the boats.
The rates of subjective happiness, immediate and long-term happiness over time go way, way up.
Yeah.
And so I'm convinced that the nervous system doesn't like to keep the valves on these dopamine circuits open. I actually think it diminishes from the reward component. And there are actually some data on this. Anyway, I don't want to take us off track, but
the last part of this, what we do then is we take that quadrant and we take that list and then you're going to print it physically and you're going to put it in 2 places. This could actually be on your phone. You don't actually print it. You can screenshot it. It can be the background of your phone. So every time you click on your phone, you immediately see that quadrant. Like it's a very clear reminder of like, what are my priorities today, right? Just a simple little picture. I also like to put it in your place of failure. So for a lot of people, that is like on their laptop or right above their workstation, right? It's like the thing that's going to lose and beat your fitness is your job, typically, right? Or it's on your TV. It's on your Netflix control. No, sorry, Netflix, no offense. But you know what I mean? Like it's whatever the thing is that you fail for. I play too many video games. Great. There. I work too much. Okay, great. And you put it there and you put it also, the last component is it has to also be in the hands of somebody who can hold you accountable, right? Wife, training partner, business partner, whatever. So it's like, hey, Andrew, like you promised you were going to do X yourself. Why are you still here? You committed to this. You got to get out of here. Someone who will like be like, no, it's drop everything and read. It's 8:00. You're supposed to be reading. You got to go. You're going to check back in on that. Check back in every week. Check back in. It doesn't matter every month. And then you can adjust. It's fine. You can always change the system. But that has to now change. You got to print a new one. And now it's a whole new promise you've made to yourself. So you've got to be able to hold yourself accountable to those things. It's got to be flexible enough to where it's realistic. It can't be, I'm not going to work after 6:00 every day. Maybe it's just 3 days a week. Maybe it's on Saturdays, I promise to work for the first 2 hours so I don't work Saturday night, or whatever, or the inverse. I'm not going to work Saturday. You get it. You could come up with a million examples here. So that's the system we use to make sure that we have now properly identified where we're going. We found a roadmap to that, and now we know exactly how we're going to stay on track. I have to take this opportunity to add one more thing to our drop everything list, and you gave the example of deer, which is maybe drop everything and read, or drop everything and relax, or another example, I have to add a deal, which is drop everything, and this is for you, Lex, love.
Actually, one of the advantages of having a dog or having children is that the drop everything and love is often enforced by the faces of those that you love. They just show up in whatever space you happen to be in.
Especially if you work from home.
I'd like to take a brief break to acknowledge our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you reach your health goals. I've long been a believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health and well-being can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. One issue with a lot of blood tests and DNA tests out there, however, is that you get information back about various levels of lipids and hormones and metabolic factors, etc., but you don't know what to do with that information. Inside Tracker makes knowing what to do with all that information exceedingly easy. They have a personalized platform that lets you see what your specific numbers are, of course, but then also what sorts of behavioral do's and don'ts, what sorts of nutritional changes, what sorts of supplementation would allow you to bring those levels into the ranges that are optimal for you. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you can visit insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off any of Inside Tracker's plans. Again, that's insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off.
Let's move on to the next one, shall we? Number 3 here is going to be what I call calendar or sort of time frame. So it's going back a little bit and saying you've decided on this goal and you've identified the defenders. Now we need to come up with a realistic time frame for how long it's going to take to accomplish that goal. And when you do that, you need to look at your life schedule. And what I mean by that is, do you have important deadlines coming up? Do you have a holiday? Do you have a trip? Do you have travel? Do your children have something coming up? You need to take all that information, and I literally lay out a calendar, and I write all those dates in a physical calendar first. And the reason I'm suggesting this is you want to work your training backwards around that. As we've been discussing, life will win. If you try to plan a training program that is 5 days a week, 90 minutes a day, and all of a sudden you look 2 weeks from now and you realize you've got a grant deadline and then you've got to take 2 days to go to Austin. It's just foolish. You're going to fail and then you're going to quit and you're going to be like, man, again, my training program failed. So you need to figure out what the non-negotiables are in that business quadrant and just not be foolish. All right. So let's imagine you're going to plot out, say, a 12-week training phase and you've decided on this goal. And then you look and you realize in the middle of this 12-week span, week 5 is really hectic and chaotic. Or you realize that this is a quarter in which something important is due. Maybe we want to either adjust the goal, or what we really do in this step is going on to actually step number 4, which is choose the number of days per week you can exercise and the length in terms of amount of time you can truly afford to train. I would rather you underestimate that than overestimate it. So you look at the calendar, you put all these non-negotiables, the deadlines you cannot move in the calendar, and then you say, look, based on this, realistically, I can conservatively train 3 days a week for 60 minutes total. And that includes the time I walk into the gym, my warm-up, my down-regulation breathing at the end, and then me getting back either in the shower and back. Because really now it's maybe 90 minutes by the time you traveled, you transitioned, you picked back up on work, you showered, you ate, etc. That time just runs away from you, and all of a sudden it was a 2.5-hour thing, even though it was a 45-minute workout. So you really need to figure that thing out. If you're a few weeks in and you realize, oh, actually I have a little more time than I thought, you can always train more. You can do another thing, you can add it. But what you don't want to do is set up a program that is requiring you to do certain exercises on one days or certain styles of training on another, and then you constantly miss one of those days. I thought I could do 4 days a week, but 1 day a week something's getting pulled out. That's just going to keep you off schedule. It's going to make you feel like a failure, and you're going to run into problems with your training. So schedule 3 if you are sure you can get 3, and if there's an extra day, we can always do other fun stuff. All right, so that's really step 3 and 4. Figure out your life events over the course of this time. How many days a week can you train? And then how long in terms of minutes per workout? Notice, we haven't selected a single exercise yet. We haven't worried about how heavy, rest intervals, all those modifiable variables. You don't need to pick those later. First, where are we going? Second, how are we going to get there, which is the quadrant and the identifying of defenders. And then the third is, what are the restrictions I need to place on myself in terms of program design based on how often and how long I can work out. That is going to allow you to go back to some of the previous episodes and go, man, you gave us all kinds of ideas. How do I know which one to choose? This is your answer. You're going to choose based upon the limitations of time and frequency. So if you've already said, let's imagine we're in bucket A or bucket C, it doesn't matter. And you go, look, the most I can afford with where I'm at, with what's going on in my life, is 3 days a week. Well, we automatically know we're going to have to start choosing a training style that's limited to 3 days a week. Don't even worry about the 4 or 5 day stuff. Those are off the table. And now we've placed restrictions. It kind of goes back to that concept of, I think it's one of your podcast guests, Jocko, right? It's just like, hey, structure gives us actually some freedom. So by creating some restrictions here, we're a little more free to go, I only actually have to choose between A and B, rather than sitting down and going, man, I'm 20 hours into this exercise podcast thing, and there's so many options between to pick. Well, you create a little bit of restriction, and now it's easier to go, oh, my only option is A or B. And there we go.
So that's number 4.
That's 3 and 4. At that point, once we're good there, now what you want to do is go to step number 5, which is actually select your exercises or your movements. And this can be as simple as selecting like a kettlebell swing or running or swimming. It could be your entire exercise mode. And what you want to do with exercise selection here is make sure that you're balancing those exercises across the whole week, not within necessarily every workout. So if you have 4 days a week, 5 days a week, you want to look at the exercise selection and say, okay, I need to have somewhat of a reasonable balance between movement patterns or muscle groups or front and back, side to side, however you're thinking of it, just across that week, right? So again, say we're on a 3-day program and we're in either of the buckets, any of the buckets really, and we say, okay, great. Maybe it's not ideal if all I select is cycling every day. That's not a lot of balance. I don't notice there's no upper body work there. There's no torso work. There's no other positions. So maybe I'm going to really focus on cycling. So I will do only cycling 2 days a week. But that 3rd day, I need to pick something for the other movement areas. And that's going to make sure you stay in a reasonable balance. If you have an exercise that you like, great. If you have exercise you have access to. Again, maybe the gym is a giant pain in the ass. And so you can say, look, it's too far away. The closest one is 45 minutes there and back. So maybe I'm going to restrict myself to only kettlebell and bands and running because I can do those in my house. Awesome. We've actually created some freedom because we gave ourselves some restriction. And now we just have to figure out how am I going to give some movement patterns somewhat balanced across my 3 days. So really, when it comes to exercise choice, it is selecting the patterns that you know how to execute, giving yourself, again, somewhat of a balance between the muscles and the joints and the movement patterns, making sure that you are specifically targeting any muscle group or movement that you want. So making sure you want to improve muscle size in your glutes, you better make sure some of the exercises you're doing, at least 1 day a week, you feel it in your actual glutes. So you can check that box. It doesn't have to be every exercise. It probably shouldn't. It doesn't even have to be every single day. But make sure it's checked off somewhere on that list. And then the last one is there a strategy in which you can progress it? So if you're like, I'm just going to do body weight exercises. Okay, great. Well, how are you going to progress those? In the case of like body weight, it's really hard to add load. Maybe you can put a weight vest on or something, but then maybe you don't have that, or that's an extra thing, or that can only go so far. So what's my progression strategy going to be? Well, in this case, maybe you just increase the complexity by going from 2 legs, like say a body weight squat, to a single leg squat. Or you just increase repetitions, or you increase time you're going to hold it. Whatever. My point is your progression strategy will be based upon the restrictions that you place based on availability and things like that. The last thing I would recommend here in terms of exercise progression, to make sure that you can continue to do these things while lowering your risk of injury, both in the short term and long term, is to progress your exercise complexity in this fashion. So make sure, number one, you can do the exercise properly with assistance. So let's imagine a scenario where we're going to try to squat. So put your hands on a bench or something like that. Now, can you execute that squat perfectly with assistance? So you're holding on to something. Okay, great. If you can't, then don't progress past that. Don't go now do a barbell back squat if you can't do it correctly when you had assistance. But let's assume most people can do that. Okay, great. Now you can move on to the next step, which is, can you do it well without assistance? So this would be body weight only. Check. Cool. We're good there. Okay, now you can go ahead and move on. Can you do it well with an added eccentric load? So in this particular case, if we're learning to squat, we can do it well when I hold on to something. That's great. Okay, now I can do it well with just my body weight. Now if I put a little bit of weight on, whether it's a kettlebell in the front like a goblet squat or dumbbells to the side or whatever you want to do, can I lower it and go all the way down and stay in perfect position? If you can do that, great. You're allowed to go to the next step, which is, can you hold it isometrically? So can you go all the way down and then hold that bottom position? What you don't want to do is start adding load or speed or fatigue if you're going down to the bottom position of the movement and you're out of control. We really want to avoid this. So I want you to show me you can go down and you can lower the weight under control. You can hold it in that position under control. If we're clear there, now we can add the concentric portion, right? You can now go ahead, you can lower it, you can hold that position of most danger, and now you can move up at whatever speed we want. We are all good there. Once you can show me those things, you can add the last two steps, which are now speed, if you choose to, and the last one, which is fatigue, right? I would really discourage people from doing exercises to fatigue, especially with a moderate or high load, unless you can promise me you can do these first 6 steps. If you can basically go hog wild with your training, and your chances of injury are very low. Again, both acute injury as well as long-term injury, which is just sort of like my joints ache and all of a sudden my shoulder hurts and things like that. That's really what I'm looking for. And once you're clear there, you can train pretty hard.
I really like this because recently I was showing somebody how to use in this case, it was a hack squat machine. Yep. I noticed that they were very timid of getting into a deep squat position. And they cited a previous knee injury, which is long since healed.
Right.
But even with proper foot placement and everything, you just tell they were getting ginger about it as they approached that bottom position. But over time, with pauses at the bottom, they become very comfortable and now actually are going, well below 90 degrees angle between, femur and lower leg. So it was clear that it wasn't something range of motion limited, or it was a mental thing, but a logical one for them. Now, after what you just said, I think a better strategy that I could have used would have been to have them get into that position, just no weight at all, maybe nothing on the sled, and then slowly working up from there, as opposed to doing what we did in our case, which was to just convince them that they were much stronger than they thought they were. We eventually got there, but I'm realizing that there was far too much mental anguish involved in that process.
Yeah. This whole progression, by the way, this can all happen in one session. If you can check the boxes, like in that example, you may have been fine to jump there. It may have just been hey, you're fine here. Get through it. Oh, okay. This whole progression might take 2 years. I mean, this really depends on your background, if you actually have injury history, your comfort, your confidence, like all these things. So you don't need to worry about rushing through that progression. You don't even need to get all the way to the end if you don't want, especially with speed and things like that. But again, it can't happen. It doesn't have to be like, well, it's a month of this, a month of well, no. If they feel great and you can go through 1 to 7 in 5 minutes, then you're good to go.
Number 6.
Number 6 now is just order. So you know how many days per week you're going to work out. You know how long they're going to take. You've selected all the exercises you need to get done. You've balanced that across the week. Now you just need to put them in order. And the easy answer here is generally do what's most important first in the workout. There is some minor interference effect of some other things there, but the reality of it is, if you do the priority first, you're probably going to be okay. So whether this priority is a muscle group, so in the example, you want to make sure your glutes get trained, maybe do it first. If you're trying to maximize your back squat, you may not want to do a bunch of glute exercises to fatigue first. But that's not the priority we picked. We picked a different one, which is buckets A, B, and C. Okay, great. By doing it first, you told me the priority was to make sure I do something for my glutes. And then I would also like to get my back squat a little bit stronger or whatever. Okay, fine. The same thing could be done for your endurance training. You could do your endurance training before you're lifting if you understand that that means you might be compromising your lifting quality of the workout a little bit. But you might be fine with that if you say the endurance work is more important right now. Amazing. You don't know the answer to that, though, if you hadn't gone through steps 1 through 4. And that's why those things are critical. So it makes what we call chaos management, which is things happen in the moment. I don't know what to do. What should I choose? That decision becomes really clear because you can always go back to the beginning and go, my priority was this. Then therefore, that's my choice today. So it provides a very simple set of instructions for when the workout gets cut short, when your workout has to be in a hotel, and any number of things that pop up in real life, whether, again, you're an athlete or a non-athlete. Either way, life will get in the way at some point. So you need to have rules and a system that says, when this happens, I go right back to this, and that's my choice. Done. I'm moving on. No decision to make here. It's already been determined a week ago, 5 weeks ago. We're off and rolling. So the order, again, is pretty simple. Just put the one that is most important first. Now, I know you like to do legs on Monday. That's great. I actually love that too. I do the same thing generally, because to me, that's almost always the most important thing. If I miss a bicep workout, I'm probably fine, but I really don't like missing the big movement pattern. So I make sure that those happen on a day that tend to be more stable for me. Mondays are generally pretty stable. Things get chaotic as the week moves along for me. Others might be the opposite, right? Others might want to go, hey, I'm actually going to keep Monday as my flexible day or off day because I like to get a lot of my work done, get that cleared so I can have, oh, sure, like work it around you. Some people love to train on Saturdays because it's their most free. Some people hate it. Sure. You tell me, what is the biggest priority and when are you the most fresh? Monday, Tuesday, it doesn't matter. Depends on your work schedule. Maybe you work the weekends. I don't know. Right? You decide what day of the week are you generally the most consistent schedule, and the most consistent energy. And do the thing that is most important on that day. It doesn't matter Monday, Tuesday, day 1, day 3. We were sort of talking about this earlier, but you actually don't even have to do a week schedule. Our brains tend to like to go year, month, week. But a lot of folks will even just run this thing in terms of like a 7 or 9 day schedule. In fact, we ran a 9-day training schedule for one of my Major League Baseball players. And he's 8 or so years into his career, and he's hitting all-time PRs in velocity. And he's very, very good. And it was a 9-day training cycle, and we ran that for the entire season. So it doesn't have to be a 7-day split, but it tends to work for a lot of people because most people have a fairly consistent schedule across the 7 days. So pick the thing that is most important and do it first, and do it on the day of the week that is most consistent for you in terms of schedule and energy.
I really like what you're describing. I should just say that one of the reasons I put legs on Monday is because I tend to get enough sleep on the weekends. I generally get enough sleep during the middle of the week, but oftentimes things will come up. I can be pretty sure, however, that I've quote unquote caught up on my sleep on the weekends. This notion of catching up on sleep is a little dicey scientifically, but I tend to be pretty rested by Monday morning.
Right.
And actually my week begins on Sunday, and Sundays are when I get my long form cardio. So those two are really non-negotiable. And the reason that long-form cardio is on Sunday is that it can take many different forms. It can take a hike with a weighted vest. It can take the form of a jog. It can be done with other people. It can be family time. It can be time with friends and so on. And that's pretty hard to do during the middle of the week, or pretty hard to ensure, at least for me. I also find that by bookending the week with some non-negotiable days of training on Sunday, Monday, then if the week gets busy Tuesday, Wednesday, or even sometimes Thursday with travel and things like that, one can sort of catch up toward the weekend. It's not ideal. I mean, ideally it's spaced out, but really this isn't about what I do. This is really just to underscore the principle you described, which is I have a very clear sense now over, 3 decades or so of training and 3 decades or so of being involved in academics and science and work, of when I tend to be most rested,
right,
when I tend to have some flexibility in my schedule, and also when I'm trying to combine fitness with some of my social engagements, which is actually quite fun. One thing I noted is that the 4 boxes that you mentioned before, work, relationships, fitness, and recovery, some of them do have some crossover.
They all do.
A hike with family or friends is both relationship and fitness and so on. But I love the principle because anything that can add consistency, as you pointed out, is going to greatly increase the probability of reaching one's goals. That's sort of an obvious one. But in an earlier episode, you also said something that I wrote down and is really still ringing in my mind, especially now, which is that consistency always beats intensity.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. We used to do a thing when I was training NFL players for the Combine many years ago, where Saturdays were supposed to be the day they came in and we did the most regeneration. So this is when they get body work done, and we do hot, cold contrast and sort of all these things. And our attendance was like 1%. Nobody showed up, right?
For a massage?
Nobody showed up.
Wow.
Seems
surprised.
right. But remember,
I love a good massage.
of course, but remember, you're 18 years old. You're likely to be getting millions of dollars handed to you in the next few weeks or months. And
he's not referring to me, by the way.
No.
I'm actually quite a bit older than 18. And I'm not getting handed millions of dollars each week.
Right. So I would think that. But those folks, like, they recover super fast. They've never really had that. And also, like, Friday night, kind of enticing. And so nothing was there. And the strategy then was, what if we, instead of having a important hard training day on Saturday, we transition and it is only things they want to do. So we basically identified, what are the things in training you love the most? And let's do those Saturdays. And it turns out for those folks, no surprise here, it was what we call the gun show. So they would come into the gym and we would literally do nothing but biceps and triceps. They'd just get a pump. And then the deal was, though, you come in, and literally what would come in is we would pick 3 guys, say you, and you. You pick your favorite bicep exercise. You pick your favorite one. You pick your favorite one. You 3 over there, you pick your favorite tricep. And we just run a big circuit. Like, just like, how many reps? I don't know. I don't care. How many sets? I don't even care. Just like pump away. Like, I don't even care, right? We chose small muscle groups. Not really going to interfere with much. We're training them for the NFL Combine, which is like, it's legs performance, basically, right? So it's like, if they smash their biceps and triceps on a Saturday, it's not going to influence what we did on Monday. So recovery wasn't an issue. Once we finish the gun show, though, now you have to go do your regen stuff. So if you need chiro work, you need physical therapy, whatever you're going to do. So we would get them in the building with the low-hanging fruit, and then we would actually get them to do their work. You can do the same thing, and I honestly do the same thing. I tend to do either, if I'm going to do an upper or lower split, I'm going to do that stuff either Friday night or Saturday, because it's very difficult for me to do a hard, long workout Friday night, right? Or even Friday morning for that matter. The same thing Saturday. I wake up and now it's like, it's family mode, it's kid things. I want to do stuff. But I can usually convince myself to be like, all right, just go in there, go 20 minutes and get your upper body stuff done. All right, I can walk myself into that mentally. It's harder to walk yourself into your 5 sets of 5 deadlift. It's sort of just like, whoa, I ain't got that in me right now. My high intensity intervals, the max I don't have that right now. So I'll either go for my long steady state stuff, which is like, I'm going on the bike, I'm riding down to the beach, or coming back, nasal only. I can get myself to go for a bike ride like that, whatever. So I pick the thing that I'm likely to do on the days where I'm probably going to be my weakest, quote unquote, not physically, but motivation wise. For a long time, I tried to it just got stuck in a way where my harder stuff was Friday nights. And I'm just like, why am I doing this? I was having like a 50% success rate, just like we were having like a no % success rate with the NFL guys on Saturday. So you have to be a little bit tough. You have to grind sometimes. You have to, get some motivation and go after it. But you also have to be like, well, this is just stupid planning, right? Like, why put yourself in a position where you're just failing over and over and over when I could move it and go, look, those sessions are going to be things that are easier. They don't require as much gusto to get up and get them done. I get those things done 90% of the time. Because the worst case, I can be like, all right, we're going to go do a family thing. Give me 20 minutes. I'm just going to run up there and smash upper body. And you don't need, I need a 20-minute warm up. It's like I can just kind of jump into those things if I had to. If I feel great, then I can still go do something else, or I could do more. I could do a longer session. But you're sort of immune to any situation. So I would bookend those, I guess is what I'm saying. What's the day you're going to have the best day, and what's the day you generally have the worst? And put the programs around those situations.
I love the idea of identifying the friction points, the high friction and low friction days.
Yep.
Friction meaning anything that impedes you from training consistently or well. And there are so many factors that ratchet into that: sleep, other social engagements, work. Friday night, I also find it tough to do any kind of training. I do cardiovascular training. I do interval type training on Fridays typically. But there's a lot of cumulative fatigue and stress that happens across the week. Oh, no. And usually for a long time, more than a decade now, I've been telling myself that Saturday is the day that I try to reduce my cortisol as much as possible from the week. Then Sunday is the day that I enjoy that low cortisol state. And that's Amazing. Actually what opened up into the long, slow run. I actually like to think of myself as a bit of a mule, during those long runs. I actually have a shirt that has a sloth on it that I wear to remind myself to go slowly on those runs. Not that I ever run that fast, but there's the whole mindset around it is to be a bit of a mule, just kind of moving through it. And the fatigue factor is more one of, at first there's a little bit of boredom, but then I've noticed there's a whole different set of mental scapes that open up under different training types. And this is maybe something we get into a little bit in a future episode or discussion. When you train really intensely for short periods of time one way, your mind goes into a particular state. When you do long duration training, your thinking and indeed even the way it affects sleep patterns is also very different. I think one of the great futures for neuroscience and exercise science in collaboration is to identify how different patterns of physical movement relate to different patterns of thinking and vice versa. Amazing. Anyway, something maybe to just earmark for a future conversation, but there's clearly a relationship there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when we certainly know of a pretty clear relationship between even what we would classify as zone 5 exercise and deep sleep.
So zone 5, again, being you're breathing a lot through your mouth because you have to in order to bring in enough oxygen to offset the acidity created by the
carbon.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, this is the high heart rate. So if you're going to look at it and hit a number, looking for something like 30 plus minutes a week, being in the top 10% of your heart rate.
That impacts deep sleep.
Is going to positively impact deep sleep, as long as it's done very far away from deep sleep. So you don't want to do that at night. So you want in terms of time. So if you hit those numbers earlier in the day, oftentimes that will enhance deep sleep.
Yeah, I was looking at some papers recently, and the number that kind of emerged from those papers was that unless it's low intensity exercise, trying to exercise about 6 hours or more away from your sleep time would be ideal. Now,
Bingo.
That said, for those of you that have to hit the gym or go for a run in the evening and then are trying to fall asleep 4 to 6 hours later, I wouldn't want that statement to impede your regular exercising.
Yeah, there's an easy trick to that. Just finish it with down regulation breathing. So that's sort of one of our things that because that is a realistic situation, right?
Right. Finish work at 5 or even 6, and then by the time you're training or running or whatever you want to call it, it's 7:38. You're home at 9. You're eating, and then everyone's like, you can't eat 2 hours before bed. Pretty soon, you run into a number of different collision points that make you wonder whether or not you're doing everything wrong or if it's really worth training at all.
100%.
And I would argue it's better to train than not to train, but provided that you can still get to sleep.
100%. So you have to walk a little bit of a game. We run into this issue with the NBA players, right? You're playing games at 6 o'clock at night to start. Major League Baseball is a 7:05, 7:10 pitch, right? And also, by the way, we're changing time zones every 5 days. Right, UFC fighters and such, we're usually training twice a day. There is no option to train, we are training twice a day, always. So we have to come up with strategies for that. And there's other like non-athlete scenarios, of course, where it's like there is no other option here. Cool. So what we do is a couple of things. Number one, the further away you can make it from sleep, the better if possible. We do need to train, though, around the same time you're going to be playing. Like that has to happen. So the harder and longer we go in the training session, the harder and longer we go in our down regulation post-exercise. And that is, in my estimation, the number one lever you can pull that can help, right? Now, if it really does start crushing sleep, you're going to have to make a critical decision there. In general, it's not a good reason to not exercise. But maybe you restrict it to only a couple of days a week, you go all the way up in intensity, and the rest of the days, maybe 70%, you stay in just kind of a working zone. Awesome. Maybe it's a longer down regulation. Maybe there's other strategies you can do. But yeah, you want to be careful of, and we've had this situation a number of times where it's sort of just like sleep complaints. We run full sleep studies on them in their house. We do the whole thing with absolute rest. We come in, we do the whole thing, eye tracking, biomarkers, the whole thing. And it's like, oh, you just need to stop doing intervals at 8 p.m.
Right. And I would add to that, another incentive for being able to train with or without caffeine is that it's very clear that even if you can fall asleep after ingesting caffeine in the preceding hours, that caffeine consumed in the, 12, but really, 8 to 10 hours, 4 hours prior to bedtime really disrupts the architecture of sleep. So if you critically rely on caffeine in order to train, whatever your training might be, and you know that sleep is important for recovery, well, then it's pretty obvious where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So having that flexibility is vitally important.
Yeah, you've probably also covered this, but you can actually measure that directly. So by eye tracking patterns, you can actually identify the effects that caffeine has on sleep, independent of a sleep time or not.
Right. They're never positive effects.
Correct.
That said, I am a proponent of caffeine early in the day. And caffeine does have a lot of, it's anti-neurodegenerative, and as long as you're not getting anxiety, it's pro-performance, both mental and physical performance. But of course, if you do not need caffeine, if you're one of these mutants that do not need caffeine in order to go about your daily living with focus and intensity, then by all means, don't start taking caffeine.
I'm not the hugest fan. I am scientifically 100% on board. Personally, I don't do well on it.
Well, you seem to ride a little bit more what we would call, sympathetic tone, kind of shifted towards more alert. I tend to be naturally a bit more like my Bulldog Costello was, a little bit more on the mellow, sleepy side. Yeah. And caffeine just puts me right at that alert but calm place. And I can get away with drinking I wouldn't say ridiculous, but a fair amount of caffeine and remain there. But I do restrict it until the time right up about 2 p.m. at the latest is really when I try and drink caffeine. Number 7.
Great. So number 7 and 8 are pretty simple. This is now choose the intensity and the volume. So we've discussed those at length in the previous episodes. We probably don't have the time to go back over all those details. So remember the adaptation you're training for and pick the appropriate rep range, total amount of sets, as well as the intensity to then get the corresponding adaptation, right? All you have to do is select those things. In terms of progression through a week, the rule of thumb we say for intensity is something around 3% per week, all right? For volume, it will depend on what you're doing a little bit, but anytime you cross more than 10% per week, you're going to start running into problems. So I like 5% better. It doesn't need to be as low as 3. You can jump up much more than that. 5 to 7% is better. So if you are doing, say, running, because the numbers make it easy, and you're doing 10 miles per week total, and if you were to go up to 11 miles the next week, great, you're right around 10%. But what you wouldn't want to do is say, I'm running 10 miles this week, and I did maybe 4 Monday, 3 Wednesday, 3 Friday. So 4, 3, and 3, you got your 10. Then you wouldn't want to add a mile every day. So Monday, instead of doing 4, I did 5. Wednesday, instead of doing 3, I did 4. Friday, instead of doing 3, I did 4. What you actually did is you went from 10 to 13, which is a much higher percent jump than the 10% prescribed. So the same thing would be true for lifting weights. The same thing is actually true for calories and trying to add them, etc. So the body tends to not handle those things as well, jumping more than 10% per week.
So keeping with this idea of increasing progressive overload, being 10% more over some period of time, am I correct in assuming that I want to identify 1, maybe 2 meaningful variables and progressing that or those variables?
So progressive overload can come in the form of any of the modifiable variables. So you could increase the complexity of the movement. You could increase the intensity or the load. You can increase the volume by either more sets, more reps, or more total exercises in a day.
What about time under tension?
You could also manipulate how the tempo of each repetition. You could also manipulate how many times per day you train. So you can manipulate frequency. You can also manipulate rest intervals. So you can progressively load any of these things. Increase intensity. Run a little bit faster. Complete the same amount of work slightly faster. Put 5% more on the barbell or the load or the handle or whatever you're going to do. That's a simple way. If you want to think about volume, in the case of endurance work, it's simple. Mileage, time, whatever. In the case of lifting, all you have to do is take the amount of repetitions you're doing per set, multiply it by the sets, add that all up. So if you're doing 3 sets of 10, that's 30 repetitions. If you did 3 exercises, you just did 90 repetitions. Put that number down for Monday, put that number down for Wednesday, put that number down for Friday. Add that total up. So say you did 90, 90, 90. You would look and say, my total number of repetitions this week is 270. If I want to go up 5%, then I need to go up another 15 or so total repetitions. Great, that's all we have to do. That's the increase. You may keep the load exactly the same, keep the exercises the same, change nothing else, but you want to add 15 more total reps for your week. And you may choose to do that by adding one more repetition per set. Close enough. So last week I did 3 sets of 10. This week I'm going to 3 sets of 11. It can be as simple as that. Again, it can be complex. I walked you through. It can be any of the modifiable variables, but the progression I just laid out is fairly simple, and it's honestly the one I recommend for most people just because it will avoid confusion and it will avoid people taking massive leaps in volume. So the typical strategy I would recommend here is increasing load or intensity or a little bit of a combination slowly for about 6 or so weeks, and then taking what we generally call a deload. So back down to maybe 70%, whatever that number is you've been doing. So you did 3 sets of 10 and you worked yourself all the way up to 3 sets of 15. Back that down and maybe we'll do 2 sets of 8 for the week. And then we'll come back the following week and go back and do the highest we've done now. All of a sudden we're going to do 4 sets of 12 or something like that. So if you get these little deloads every, depending on what you're doing, 4 to 8 weeks or so, you should be in a spot where you can continually progress for a very long time without either burning out or overloading and overstressing an injury pattern. So the simple way, pick intensity or volume and just go up slightly every week for a short span of time, generally around 6 weeks, and then you can come back and change your strategy if you like.
Because you mentioned sets and repetitions here, just wanted to remind folks that in the episode that we did on strength and hypertrophy, and that also included speed, there was a description of a terrific program for strength, which is the 3x5 program, or 3-2-5 program, as it's called, which is to select 3 to 5 exercises performed for 3 to 5 repetitions, 3 to 5 times per week, with 3 to 5 minutes rest in between those exercises.
For 3 to 5 sets.
And if I recall correctly, the protocol for generating hypertrophy, muscle growth, is to perform a minimum of 10 and probably more like 15 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And that can be done in a single session per muscle per week. So one could train, for instance, quadriceps 1 day per week, as long as you're getting that volume of sets per week. Or it could be divided up across 2 or 3 different sessions for that individual muscle group. Of course, people are going to target all their major muscle groups and hopefully some of them minor muscle groups as well. And as I recall, the number of repetitions that can generate hypertrophy is quite broad, anywhere from 6 repetitions all the way up to 30 repetitions. But by the end of the set, it should be to failure or close to failure with good form. Is that correct?
Yeah. And we would say close to failure is probably most appropriate. You can actually reach failure maybe on a few of the sets, maybe the end, and probably best to choose that with the exercises that are safer. Not that any exercise is particularly unsafe if you do it appropriately, but you may not want to go to true failure on every set for the more complex, larger, riskier exercises. So hedge pretty close to failure, but not all the way.
And I realize I forgot to mention rest intervals between sets. It follows that if a large range of repetitions are performed, that a large range of rest intervals are allowed, meaning there could be rest intervals between sets of as low as 30 seconds between sets or as high as 2 or 3 minutes, depending on the loads that one is using. And that, of course, will scale with the number of repetitions.
Excellent. In fact, that sort of leads me into step number 9 of designing your own training program, which is you've decided our goal, we've worked our calendar out, we've figured out how many days per week and how long we're going to work out in those sessions. We then went and selected our exercises. We balanced them across the movement patterns and the muscle groups that we need, so we're not causing excessive stress on the same exact joint or muscle group over time. We then ordered our exercises based on priority. All right. Because of that, we've identified our goal. We went back and we selected the volume, which is the repetitions per set, the total amount of sets, and the load per set that matched the goal that we wanted to get or the adaptation. Now all we have to do is fill in the rest intervals, which reflect back again the goal. So generally higher rest intervals, which means time that you rest between your sets, higher, somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes, for things like speed, power, and strength. Perhaps a little bit lower, although as you mentioned, it could also stay high for hypertrophy. And then for endurance, you follow the rest interval that reflects the type of endurance training that you'd like to get. That's walked us through 1 through 9. We're almost done. We've put together a pretty nice little protocol. It should be well-rounded. It should be effective. We've also talked about how to progress it from week to week, keeping it within, again, 4 to 6 weeks, maybe up to 8, before we then take a back off. The very last thing we have to do to make sure this training program is customized to you, your goal, and your situation, which is then going to enhance your likelihood of adherence and consistency, as well as increase the likelihood of effectiveness, is we just have to do a little bit of what we call chaos management, which is take a quick moment to think through, this program looks great, but if I had to nitpick it, where are the possible chances of failure? And you just want to sort of think about where would I predict things would go wrong? And if anything pops out to you, try to come up with your solution at the beginning. And this could be a number of things. So maybe you've picked an exercise and you realize, man, I really actually don't like that exercise. Or maybe you look at the schedule now that it's laid out in front of you. You look at your work schedule and you're like, maybe that's a bit aggressive. I don't know. It could be any number of things. But it is a useful exercise to just think through everything realistically. I typically, just like it's the adage I teach my graduate students, before we hit submit, we're going to sleep. So it's there, it's ready. We're going to take 12 hours. We're going to wake up the next day and look at it again and go, are we sure we're good here? Yep. Make adjustments if you need. If not, if you feel confident, then hit send and cross your fingers.
Yeah, we were referring to submitting the manuscript. It's interesting you say that. I have a statement that I always make to people in my lab. They hit submit, and I always say that you realize you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, there's going to be an email in your inbox that something was formatted incorrectly, and you're going to spend tomorrow reformatting and submitting again. So I've also learned that every project is actually two projects.
I'm trying to not die over here and interrupt you.
Yeah, it's true. I've done this enough times. I've done this, many dozens of times. And then there's also another truism of science, which is that, there's the project, there's a scientific question, and then the paper is yet another project. And I actually think this is an analogy that carries over to other domains of life. I think that anytime we take on something, like we want to write a book, or we want to get a degree, or we want to run a fitness program, I think it's worth thinking about those decisions as actually taking on two major things, because one is the planning and organization around that thing, and the other is the actual performance of the thing. And so I say that
Wonderful.
because here, what you just described, this 10 steps to consider in designing a program. I think some people who are real list makers and love the precision and the thoroughness, and I'm one of these people, thinking this is great. I just want to check off each one of these things on the list and figure out the ideal program for me for a given period of time, et cetera. And then other folks might be thinking, well, that's a lot. That's just a lot to do. But what I know with certainty is that performing those sorts of, let's just call them what they are, those tasks of figuring out what's what, where the defenders are, et cetera, without question makes everything go so much more smoothly once you are into the actual performance, the action of doing the exercise program or the book or the podcast or whatever it is that you happen to do. So I'm grateful that you brought up both the things that act as conduits for getting good work done and this notion of defenders and bottlenecks, because if we don't consider those, I would argue that it's a very low probability that anyone will succeed. But when one does consider those, even just a few of them, I think the probability of success goes way, way up immediately.
That's actually a very good point. That is a lot of work for a lot of people. And I know when I'm consuming information, it is helpful to hear structure and systems and design. It's also helpful to hear actual real life examples. So maybe the next thing we can do here is I can just walk you through an entire setup and a program, considering folks that are in bucket A, B, and C. And maybe I'll save a little bit of the explanation and we'll eliminate maybe some background, and I'll just walk you through what this could look like. All right. So I created a program which should run about a year. And the idea here is that this could be an evergreen system. So one could check off all the boxes that we've talked about. So in general, we want to have three primary goals with exercise. We want to look a certain way, whatever that means to you. We want to be able to perform a certain way, whether that's for life goals like hiking and energy or sport goals or whatever. And then we want to be able to do that across our lifespan. Okay, so a program that gives you all the goals we talked about, and a program that covers that health combine that we referred to way back in some of our earlier discussions, which, as a little bit of a recap, is what are the physical fitness parameters that we know are critical to maintaining both lifespan and wellness span? And as a bit of a reminder, those are things like your grip strength, your leg strength, your total amount of muscle mass, your actual speed and power so that you can catch yourself from a fall, your VO2 max, and your physical fitness. So I want a program that does a little bit of all that. It's similar, actually, and we're kind of crossing barriers between our three buckets. So I need to be able to control my fat. I need to be able to have enough muscle. That muscle needs to have enough function. And I need to be able to maintain range of motion so that I don't lose flexibility and get hurt. And then I need to have a good VO2 max as well as to be able to sustain energy over time. So that was the goal of my progress. Now, a couple of other things that we haven't chatted about, which are very important. You have mentioned, I think, on a previous podcast about the importance of seeing light. Is this something you've covered at one point or another?
I joke that I'll be going into the grave and they'll be shoveling dirt onto me and I'll be telling people what I'll tell you again now, which is to get 5 to 30 minutes of sunlight viewing as early in the day as possible, ideally from sunlight. That's why it's called sunlight, or from bright lights of another kind if you cannot get sunlight. And also get that in the evening, and then avoid bright lights between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. unless you do shift work, in which case check out our episode on shift work.
Amazing. So we've got a little bit of a juxtaposition where people are like, I need to work out and do all this training, but then I'm also supposed to be outside. Okay, how do I blend those two things into my training program? Cool. So I checked that box as well. I built that in. The last thing here is we've talked about structured exercise, and just in this episode, we've really opened up and do non-structured exercise, hiking, sports, things like that. Well, one thing that is incredibly clear, and my colleague and friend Tommy Wood at the University of Washington published a fantastic paper very recently on the importance of proprioception in maintaining and staving off late onset dementia and Parkinson's.
Maybe just remind people what proprioception is.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's structured exercise, and that's very important. But then there's also things like balance and coordination, and proprioception meaning you're adjusting to stimuli coming in from the outside world. So this stimuli could be sound, could be light, could be smell, or in the physical case of the body, it is where you are at in space. So I'm feeling like I'm falling to the left, therefore I need to correct and move back to the right. So you don't get this with doing things like a hack squat on a machine. You get this typically from being outside. So now you're smelling and seeing things, and you're also not landing with your foot in the exact same position on an even platform. We get this from things like sport. Now I'm not only exercising, but I'm reacting to the outside world. The ball's going over here, my opponent's going over there. So it's very important, in my opinion, to have at least one session per week of exercise in which you are doing something that challenges proprioception, right? So how do I fold all of these best practices into one training program that's not 200 hours a week, 7 days a week? That's what I've laid out to you. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Cool. Let me walk you through it, and then maybe we'll come back into each individual category, and you can ask questions about them. So the way that I think is best is to have a goal, and have that goal be around 8 to 10 weeks long, like we've been talking about. So what I gave you is, let's start off with quarter number 1 of the year. So perhaps January through March or so, and it doesn't have to be this one, but just as an example, you decide your goal is going to be to put some muscle mass on. So we're going to prioritize adding muscle. Okay. Now within that, you're going to be bulking up, adding some muscle, but we're also going to be sleeping more. We know we need extra recovery in this session, and we need to go up in calories. Now, this happens to work nice for a couple of reasons. But in that protocol, maybe we're going to do 7 days or 7 sessions a week of physical activity. Doesn't mean 7 days. But maybe those sessions are something like, I will do one indoor sport. This could be basketball. Could be any number of things, right? So I got my sport ticked off and it's indoors. Why? I'm January to March. The weather's probably not great for most of the world, so I'm not going to do as much outside activity. I'm going to do weights maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and then maybe 2 days a week I'll go for a long walk. Okay?